Hey there, I'm Mr. Terry. I'm a high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. All right, if you're watching this video, without a doubt, you have been following the recent escalation in Israel and Palestine. And I thought this would provide a perfect opportunity to start to talk about the context of this situation. And it's one of those situations where you're probably hearing a lot of opinions from a lot of people that know very little actually about the context of this. So in trying to pick a video for this, it was pretty simple for me. I searched in YouTube for Israel Palestine history, and the video with by far the most views is one that Vox made. So I wanted to check this out and see what people are watching right now, and of course add my own thoughts to it. All right, as always, original videos down below. Let's get to it. You know, this topic of trying to talk about this context also kind of hits a little closer to me, just because in my degree program, when I got my history degree, my senior kind of thesis capstone project was on the Balfour Declaration, which was a document. I hope you can't really talk about the conflict without discussing the Balfour Declaration, but was very influential to paving the way for this conflict. So hopefully I can have a chance to talk about that, depending on what they have here. So, all right, they just titled this video, The Israel-Palestine Conflict, A Brief, Simple History. Let's see what we got.
One of the biggest myths about the Israel-Palestine conflict is that it's been going on for centuries.
Yes.
All about ancient religious hatreds.
Yep. Right away. That's the most important thing, is that people are making this conflict more directly related to events thousands of years ago, and more and even more religious than it could be, that it actually is, even though it is religiously, backed as well. But right away, okay, 7 seconds in, I've already stopped, but I had to highlight that it is actually a more recent conflict than most people realize.
In fact, while religion is involved, conflict's mostly about two groups of people who claim the same land. Right. And it really only goes back about a century, to the early 1900s. Around then, the region along the eastern Mediterranean we now call Israel-Palestine, been under Ottoman rule for centuries, was religiously diverse, including mostly Muslims and Christians, also a small number of Jews who lived generally in peace.
Yeah, the Ottoman Empire allowed an appearance, more than an appearance, but allowed for religious tolerance, depending on the time in history. But it is a religiously diverse area with a home of Christians and Jews, although Muslims have dominated this entire region for thousands of years.
It was changing.
Not thousands. Sorry, for many centuries.
In two important ways.
I was thinking Jews.
First, more people in the region were developing a sense of being not just ethnic Arabs, but Palestinians, a distinct national identity. At the same time, not so far away in Europe, more Jews were joining a movement called Zionism, which said that Judaism was not just a religion, but a nationality, one that deserved a nation of its own.
That was a changing attitude that, even going back to like World War II, where like the Nazis took. It was like, Jews were not just a religion, but they were also like an ethnicity and almost like a race. And a lot of people interpreted those things differently, but yeah.
And after centuries of persecution, many believed a Jewish state was their only way of safety and saw their historic homeland in the Middle East as their best hope for establishing it.
You understand that Jewish state was gone back in the Roman Empire. After the Jewish revolt in the 1st century AD, the Jews were basically booted out of Jerusalem and temple destroyed and all that stuff, so they hadn't had a homeland there. For that's 2,000 years.
In the first decades of the 20th century, tens of thousands of European Jews moved there. After World War I, the Ottoman Empire collapsed, and British and French empires carved up the Middle East, the British taking control of a region it called the British Mandate for Palestine. At first, the British allowed Jewish immigration, but as more Jews arrived, settling into farming communities, tension between Jews and Arabs grew. Both sides committed acts of violence, and by the 1930s, the British began limiting Jewish immigration.
Okay, we have missed a whole bunch of context. Holy cow, Vox. So a lot of promises were being made before World War I even ended about the whole region of the Ottoman Empire. The British had promised an Arab state to Arabs if they would help fight against the Ottoman Empire, which happened. That's your like T.E. Lawrence of Arabia story. Those people don't get what they want, which is going to be a problem. And then areas around Palestine and in Syria. And remember, these were all not independent places. They were part of the Ottoman Empire. They were colonized. Were also promised to both the British and also to the French. There was all kinds of promises being made basically the British and the French were making promises to anybody that would help in World War One, and then it becomes super problematic. And then under the surface, okay, there was a movement by Zionist Herzl. They were hoping that in the wake of World War One, a Jewish state could be created in Palestine, kind of similar to the ancient Israel, right? And that ends up those promises. There was a lot of financial backing and other support from Zionists across Europe with that like-minded attitude that eventually got kind of their wish in what was called the Balfour Declaration. So the Balfour Declaration, just to summarize it, was basically a statement to the leader of the kind of the Zionist movement that the British were going to seek or allow or give their blessing to the creation of a homeland for Jews in Palestine. However, there were some stipulations. The clearest one, it said, was that it would not basically negatively affect the local Palestinian Arabs that are there without infringing kind of their rights. So when World War One, and that was in 1917, by the way. So when that happened, you started to see that movement of Jews into the area after World War One, because the British had promised the backing of a state. Again, as long as it wasn't supposed to infringe upon the locals that were already there. And that's really where this story starts. That needed to be in there from Vox. That was huge because they don't explain why why Jews were moving into Europe and why the colonial powers, okay, the new colonial powers, Britain and France, but specifically Britain. I should make sure I focus on Britain because that's where it's going to be, because the British controlled Palestine, of why they were moving in this time period. They didn't really explain why.
In response, Jewish militias formed to fight both the local Arabs and to resist British rule. Then came the Holocaust.
Because Palestinians hated it too. They don't want to be ruled by. They don't want to be ruled by the British. None of these people. Arabs got screwed over. The Palestinians got screwed over.
To flee Europe for British Palestine and galvanizing much of the world in support of a Jewish
state. The Holocaust changed everything.
In 1947, as sectarian violence between Jews and Arabs there grew, the United Nations approved a plan to divide British Palestine into two separate states.
Yeah, to really get multinational support. Right, UN's created right after World War II, so that was one of their first jobs for this. But feelings and sympathy for the Jews, of course, was at an all-time high after World War II because of the Holocaust. That there was enough support to actually get a proposal in the British Mandate of Palestine, and you're going to get that. But hopefully, they're going to say there was a lot of rules about it that was supposed to happen.
One for Jews, Israel, and one for Arabs, Palestine. The city of Jerusalem,
Messy
where
borders.
Jews, Muslims, and Christians all have holy sites, was to become a special international zone.
And a lot of the you see how it's the populations are all over the place. A lot of the early areas where the Jews moved in were non-populated areas. So it's kind of, on the outskirts of where a lot of like around like outside of Jerusalem and all that stuff. But then it's going to change over time.
The plan was meant to give Jews a state, to establish Palestinian independence, and to end the sectarian violence that the British could no longer control. The Jews accepted the plan, and they declared independence as Israel.
Same with India, by the way.
But Arabs throughout the region saw the UN plan as just more European colonialism trying to steal their land. Many of the Arab states, who had just recently won independence themselves, declared war on Israel in an effort to establish a unified Arab Palestine where all of British Palestine had been.
Yeah, you understand, y'all, the bigger concept here of the entire Arab world was them being, again, colonized and ruled by the Ottoman Empire, not liking that, actually working with the allies of World War One and, going back to that, to defeat the Ottoman Empire, and then still not getting a state. And then when Israel's plopped down, they feel obviously completely betrayed, right? Because this was without local.
The new state of Israel won
support.
the war, but in the process, they pushed well past their borders under the UN plan.
This is where it becomes
taking the western half of Jerusalem and much of the land that was to have been part of Palestine. They also expelled huge numbers of Palestinians from their homes, creating a massive refugee population whose descendants today number about 7 million.
So you could see here, the area for Palestinians is getting smaller and more like collectivized into the big two Palestinian regions, right? Gaza, which is where largely the issue going on, literally as we speak, is coming from. That's going to be dense. Gaza today has 2 million people in a not very big place, and then the West Bank,
At the end of the war, Israel controlled all of the territory except for Gaza, which Egypt controlled, and the West Bank, named because it's west of the Jordan River, which Jordan controlled. This was the beginning of the decades-long Arab-Israeli conflict. During this period, many Jews in Arab-majority countries fled or were expelled, arriving in Israel. Then something happened that transformed the conflict. In 1967, Israel and the neighboring Arab states fought another war.
So you can see the first war from immediately, right, when it's established, Israel has incredible support from large, especially Western powers that the Arab, even the Arab world becoming unified in these steps, which has often been really hard for the Arab, excuse me, the entire Arab communities to come together on this, but failed because, again, Western back of Israel, and then we have another war, and, is it going to be different in the 60s?
When it ended, Israel had seized the Golan Heights from Syria, the West Bank from Jordan, and both Gaza and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt. Israel was now occupying the Palestinian territories, including all of Jerusalem.
So every time they fight back, they lose more territory. Palestinians, Arabs, that kind of thing.
This left Israel responsible for governing the Palestinians, a people it had fought for decades.
Sorry, I've been
In 1978, Israel and Egypt signed the U.S.-brokered Camp David Accords. Shortly after that, Israel gave Sinai back to Egypt as part of the peace treaty. At the time, this was hugely controversial in the Arab world.
Yeah.
Egyptian President Anwar Sadat was assassinated in part because of outrage against it. But it marked the beginning of the end.
Egypt, you got to understand this bigger context too, is Egypt had consistently tried to assume the role of kind of the leader of really the Arab world, which, many Arabs, look at all the red areas there, resented. You're going to get it with Nasser, then get it with Sadat. And that became problematic too, and it's going to divide even the Arab communities.
Of the wider Arab-Israeli conflict. Over the next few decades, the other Arab states gradually made peace with Israel, even if they never signed formal peace treaties. But Israel's military was still occupying the Palestinian territories of the West Bank and Gaza, and this is when the conflict became an Israeli-Palestinian struggle. The Palestinian Liberation Organization.
And almost now completely Palestinian. I mean, you do get support from some of these other states, a little, for like Hamas, who is the organization that runs like Gaza, but not like what you saw where like literally Egyptian military is showing up and all that stuff. They've largely backed out of it from a lot of the directly getting entangled with these situations now.
Which had formed in the 1960s to seek a Palestinian state, fought against Israel, including through acts of terrorism. Initially, the PLO claimed all of what had been British Palestine, meaning it wanted to end the state of Israel entirely. Fighting between Israel and the PLO went on for years, even including a 1982 Israeli invasion of Lebanon to kick the group out of Beirut.
The stillness of the ceasefire in southern Lebanon was shattered today by the sound of guns, bombs, and planes.
Now, the PLO later said it would accept dividing the land between Israel and Palestine, but the conflict continued.
They were talking about how look at these groups as terrorist organizations, right? Which is really, for a lot of people that may be more like middle of the fence on the issue about who they support, has, in a lot of eyes of a lot of people, made Palestinians look very bad in this situation because of using terrorist attacks, right? Remember, terrorism historically is used when the possibility of traditional warfare is not possible. And that is what this has now been results to, because the times that even if the Arab world did have unified military support, they lost. And as you saw, every time they would lose more territory. And the Israelis, in their mind, are like, well, you lost, and we obviously are in charge, right? And can take territory justified, because can always say that, like, the other side, you started it, right? The Palestinians, or whether it was the Arab world as a whole, be like, you started it, so, reap what you sow, I guess, with that kind of thing. But yeah, the Palestinians having to resort, having to feel that they resort to terrorist attacks has also give them a very bad image across the world, and has complicated things from a foreign viewpoint.
As all of this was happening, something dramatic was changing in the Israel-occupied Palestinian territories. Israelis were moving in. These people are called settlers, and they made their homes in the West Bank. It was never supposed to be allowed under the UN resolution. Palestinians wanted them or not.
But
some moved for religious reasons, some because they want to claim the land for Israel, some just because the housing is cheap, often subsidized by the Israeli government. Some settlements are cities with thousands of people, others are small communities deep into the West Bank.
If you've always felt a deep yearning for Jerusalem, now is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity not only to stand within its gates, but also to build the home of your dreams there.
Settlers are followed by soldiers to guard them, and the growing settlements force Palestinians off of their land and divide communities.
One way that land has been kind of transferred over to settlers coming in, like Israeli settlers or whatever, is, a lot of the economic turmoil that has existed in Palestine because of wars and potential sanctions and all that kind of stuff, or blockades, whatever, has led, unfortunately for a lot of Palestinians, to default on loans for their homes and things. And then what will happen is, a settler will come in and basically just be able to pick up those loans, and then they get the residence, they get the home. So like literally, so people can't pay for their homes. Someone comes in, Jewish settler or something like that will come in, take over that property and take over those loans from the banks.
Short term, they make the occupation much more painful for Palestinians. Long term, by dividing up Palestinian land, they make it much more difficult for the Palestinians to ever have an independent state. Today, there are several 100,000 settlers in occupied territory, even though the international community considers them illegal. By the late 1980s, Palestinian frustration exploded into the Intifada, which is the Arabic word for uprising.
So remember, this stuff isn't necessarily, just illegal from the UN or the UN, ruling on it when Israel was created, but even going back to like Balfour Declaration, 1917, when the British were the first to start talking about this, had said that, they will support this Jewish migration there, but having it understood that it's not going to disrupt the local population. So we go back to, the teens on this.
It began with mostly protests and boycotts, but soon became violent. Israel responded with heavy force. A couple hundred Israelis, over 1,000 Palestinians died in the First Intifada. Around the same time, a group of Palestinians in Gaza who considered the PLO too secular, too compromise-minded, created Hamas, a violent extremist group dedicated to Israel's destruction.
That's the group you're seeing right now, okay, that has gone in, and there's been a lot of atrocities going down there. A lot of, on both sides now, civilians are in the crossfire and are dying.
By the early 1990s, it's clear that Israelis and Palestinians have to make peace.
And the way that Hamas operates too is especially given Palestinians and their whole movement and everything a bad name internationally.
The leaders from both sides signed the Oslo Accords. This is meant to be the big first step toward Israel maybe someday withdrawing from the Palestinian territories and allowing an independent Palestine.
Yeah, it looked like it was getting
the Oslo Accords established a Palestinian Authority, allowing Palestinians a little bit of freedom to govern themselves in certain areas. Hardliners on both sides opposed the Oslo Accords. Members of Hamas launched suicide bombings to try to sabotage the process. The Israeli right protests peace talks with ralliers calling Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin a traitor and a Nazi. Not long after Rabin signs the second round of Oslo Accords, a far-right Israeli shoots him to death in Tel Aviv. But this violence showed how extremists on both sides can use violence to derail peace, keep a permanent conflict going as they seek the other side's total destruction.
And that has happened. The extremist groups on both sides have, honestly, they've hijacked in a lot of ways the conflict, and now there are so many people in the crossfire. And you may have seen too. There's a lot of people I've seen online, Jewish people across the world that also come in because and put their opinion on it. Because what you'll see a lot of Jews, for example, also say is, we don't all feel this way. We're not all Zionists. There are, Jews that don't feel that way, that are actually against Israel's the certain types of ways that Israel's occupied Palestinian land. So it's not a monolith. It's not a monolith especially on the Jewish side. It isn't. Just like it isn't on the Arab side.
That's a dynamic that's been around ever since. Negotiations meant to hammer out the final details on peace drag on for years, and a big Camp David summit in 2000 comes up empty. Palestinians come to believe peace isn't coming, rise up in a second intifada, this one much more violent than the first. By the time it wound down a few years later, about 1,000 Israelis and 3,200 Palestinians had died. The Second Intifada really changes the conflict. Israelis become much more skeptical that Palestinians will ever accept peace or that it's even worth trying. Israeli politics shift right.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's because what they're going to be offering is not going to be acceptable to Palestinians, and just what Palestinians are going to offer is not going to be acceptable to Israelis. So the compromise thing, neither want to compromise really, or at least not compromise to the fact or to the demands that they're actually giving.
The country builds walls and checkpoints to control Palestinians' movements.
Right.
They're not really trying to solve the conflict anymore, just manage it.
The West Bank and Gaza they're walled in. They're walled in and completely all access coming, like especially with Gaza, like they're talking about right here. Gaza is completely confined, right? It's anything that comes in and out is through basically Israel's watchful eye. That includes food and products like that, which has made life very, very difficult in Gaza. Again, you got 2 million people there, and it's very difficult. The ocean is also monitored that way too, so they're completely blockaded around, right? And yeah, that's been problematic for them, and why you're seeing a lot of especially some of the most violent stuff happening is in Gaza.
Palestinians are left feeling like negotiating didn't work and violence didn't work, and that they're stuck under an ever-growing occupation with no future as a people. That year, Israel withdraws from Gaza. Hamas gains power, but splits from the Palestinian Authority in a short civil war, dividing Gaza from the West Bank.
And by the way, those two regions aren't connected at all either. You can't move between the two.
Puts Gaza under a suffocating blockade, and unemployment rises to 40%. This is the state of the conflict as we know it today. It's relatively new, and it's unbearable for Palestinians. In the West Bank, more and more settlements are smothering Palestinians, often respond with protests and sometimes with violence, though most just want normal lives. In Gaza, Hamas and other violent groups have periodic wars with Israel.
You see, and this fight is not on equal grounds in the slightest. You'll hear about the rockets and stuff being sent, but then also, Israel has
the fighting overwhelmingly kills Palestinians, including lots of civilians.
Yeah, because what ends up happening is Gaza will attack, right? They'll attack out of Gaza. Hamas will do that. They'll launch rockets, but then you also have, for example, if you haven't learned about the Iron Dome, it is a defense system. Largely created by the United States, that is one of the most high-tech defense networks in the world. And what it does is, with insane accuracy, like 99% or whatever it is, can shoot down any rocket that basically comes, from Gaza to Israel. You can see videos of it, and it's pretty insane to see. You could see hundreds of rockets blasted in, and then they all get taken out from the ground. And then what ends up happening usually with these attacks that may come out of Gaza is Israel will retaliate and will be far more deadly than the original attacks.
In Israel itself, most people have become apathetic. For the most part, the occupation keeps the conflict relatively removed from their daily lives, with moments of brief but horrible violence. There's little political will for peace. No one really knows where the conflict goes from here. Maybe a third intifada. Maybe the Palestinian Authority collapses. But everyone agrees that things as they are now can't last much longer. Israel's occupation of the Palestinians is too unstable to last, and that unless something dramatic changes, whatever comes next will be much worse.
All right, guys. I don't want to talk too much more. I have a lot of thoughts, but I do have a few just more to add before we go. All right, so he said at the end there, something major will have to change, and that is true because there's only a couple scenarios. First off, demands of Israel vacating or breaking apart or disintegrating, whatever, is not going to happen unless some major things happen. If you're looking at from the probably hardest perspective from the Palestinian side, which is Israel needs to be gone completely, right? Back to what it was before, the Israel was created. But that's not going to happen. And the only thing that would have to change for that is, first off, foreign support for Israel would have to be gone. But then even that, Israel on its own has so much to it that it can defend itself pretty well. you'd have to get significant support for the Palestinian side from militarily advanced nations to get involved. And it, based on historical context, that doesn't seem like it probably will happen, at least not from like Western Europe or the United States. I don't see a flip happening anywhere. One of the big reasons why Israel was created and supported, say, by like the United States, was to have an ally in a region that, as a result of the of decolonization, has wanted to retain their autonomy, especially over their natural resources, say like Egypt, and why someone like Nasser was popular, as he nationalized oil industries and all that stuff. So like Western powers after the world wars were losing any hope for alliances in the Middle East. Okay, and alliances with the idea of, you know, having natural resources, say like oil or something like that, but having one like as Israel in there, although it's not producing like oil for like the West, but having a ally there has been seen as very important for public policy, or foreign policy, I should say, and that probably isn't going to go anywhere. The other reality would be as if something like Gaza, or maybe this would be more likely than Israel being, you know, vanquished that way. Those Palestinian communities in Gaza and West Bank, okay, just based off historical context, would be more likely to be probably eradicated that way through force, right? But neither seems to be anything anybody is willing to go into and support that way on any side. So what we get is where this video left off and where it's now picked up, which is these conflicts that just keep happening and are becoming more insular in Israel and Palestine, leading to so many deaths and really not any progress, especially not towards the Palestinian side for sure. So again, the history of this, the video, it did, you know, not have everything. I get it. It's 10 minutes. It's trying to get that. I really thought the Balfour stuff should have been talked about, because it would have provided way more context, because it did really just kind of seem like Jews just started showing up without even a lot of backing from the West before the Holocaust, which just isn't true. Now, after World War II, the numbers ramp up considerably, right, from after World War I. But that movement of people into areas that were not originally going to be supposed to be supported by, like, say, the British under the Declaration, that stuff was happening. So anyway, now we'll cut it here now, because we're hitting quite a while. We'll see how this goes, and if there's some other stuff I find that I think would be useful to present to all and to comment on, I'll try to do it. But we'll just play this by ear as things start to unfold. All right, if you stayed with me this long, thank you. It means you're interested, and hopefully you learned a lot from, you know, what we saw there and what I was saying. And if there's other missing context that needs to be talked about, let's talk about it in a respectful way. Put it down in the comments. All right, but I know this could also be very heated, so stick to historical facts and not emotionally charged arguments, right? Okay, with that, we'll see y'all next time.